Just if I can add a few points onto that last point. Firstly, just to thank the Sheikh for the talk, and to be honest, it was an amazing talk, mashallah, tabarakallah. And there's so much there that can be unpacked, and I believe it is recorded. So sorry to let you down there, but it's not live, so we can take the best bits out, put it up, and cause some controversy for you online, inshallah. But just if I can add a few points, so that's a camera there, yeah. So if I could add a few points, in relation to leaving off addictions such as pornography, I think also for the sisters, and my apologies, sisters, for being blunt, but I think sisters also need to understand the impact that they can have in marriages as well. And it's not to suggest that pornography is the result of women, no. But for many young men, pornography can perhaps become an avenue when their wives are not facilitating intimacy in their marriages. And so women also have to understand that. And the Prophet ﷺ was very clear in relation to intimacy. When the man requests intimacy from his wife, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that the woman should oblige. And if she does not oblige, then she is sinful. And there is a reason for that. Men and women are created differently. A man is not in control of his desires in the same way that a woman is in control of her desires. And we can see that today. The pornography industry, it caters mainly to men, not to women, because men have a lack of control over themselves. As the Sheikh mentioned, that studies show that a man, when he becomes aroused, etc., forgive me for using such language, but something happens to his brain. And he mentioned that Imam al-Ghazali suggested that the brain is taken over by that desire. Likewise, one of the earlier scholars of Islam, he said, "Ash-shahwatu junun." He actually said, "Ash-shahwatu junun." That desire is a type of loss of sanity. It can lead to a type of loss of sanity. And one of the earlier righteous people of Islam, he said, and this was in fact one of the scholars of Islam at the time, he said, "Make me responsible for the wealth of a land and I trust myself. But I do not trust myself alone in a room, even with an unattractive woman." And it's not to offend anyone, but there are unattractive people just as there are attractive people. And this individual, he said, "I do not trust myself in a room, even with an unattractive woman, but I trust myself with the wealth of the land." And so as the dua that was mentioned, رَبَّنَا لَا تَكِلْنَا إِلَىٰ أَنفُسِنَا طَرْفَةَ عَيْنٍ, do not return us to ourselves even for the blink of an eye. Why? Because as was mentioned and touched upon, it's profound. But the Prophet ﷺ specifically mentioned that women are sinful when they do not oblige their husbands' requests for intimacy. Why? Because it can lead to problems for the man. And that's a different topic. But that's something that needs to be taken into consideration for the women. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Your husband is your Jannah, your husband is your Nar." And one of the responsibilities of the woman is to facilitate to her husband desire-wise, just as the man should also facilitate to his wife desire-wise. But in our time today, many women, they are refusing to be intimate with their husbands unless it suits them. And that's haram. It's a sin. It's a sin in Islam. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned that if a man goes to sleep and he is not happy with his wife for that reason, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not happy with her until he becomes pleased with her. So that's something to be taken into consideration. And we're going to go through some of the responsibilities of parenting. The first hadith, I guess it's a good point to move into the first hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, كَفَى لِلْمَرْءِ إِثْمًا أَن يُضَيِّعَ مَن يَقُودُ, that it is enough of a sin for a man that he is taken to hellfire, that he is irresponsible and he does not take care of those whom he has been granted responsibility over, i.e. the wife and children. And so just as a man will be held accountable on Yawm al-Qiyamah for the responsibility that he has for his wife and for his children, the woman will be held accountable for the responsibility and the duty of care that she has to her husband. And the breakdown of marriage today, this is one of the elements at play, unfortunately. Men, as touched upon earlier, who are not acting like men. And there's a term, the infantilization, where you have infants that look like men. And in fact, men don't look like men anymore anyway, because men dress like cartoon characters. You have 30, 40-year-old men, and they're dressing like 16-year-olds. And you can see that in various parts of society. But likewise, women, you are responsible for the care of your husband, and men, you are responsible for the care of your wives. And this issue here, كَفَى لِلْمَرْءِ إِثْمًا أَن يُضَيَّعَ مَن يَقُولُ, subhanallah, it's a calamity. Really, it's a calamity that has befallen our communities with an S. How many men do we have? And subhanallah, and forgive me because I might be a bit blunt here, and I don't mean to offend anyone in particular, any community in particular, etc. But how many men do we have? They pray 5 times a day. They pray their sunnah prayers. They read the Quran. They look like they are from the people of salah and taqwa, but they take no responsibility for their wives or their kids. In fact, you have men, they get married like, as was mentioned, it's a plaything. Marriage is a plaything to them. Married tomorrow, divorced a few days later, married in one country, kids in another country. This is not from Islam. الرجال قوامون على النساء. It doesn't mean that men tell their women what to do. It means that men are going to be held accountable on Yawm al-Qiyamah for their women folk and their children. It's a responsibility. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh, when he was on his deathbed, and it was suggested to him that his son should be given khilafah after him, he said it's enough that one from the Khattab family is going to be held accountable on Yawm al-Qiyamah for the leadership of the community. That's what leadership is. If we truly understood what leadership was, we would run away from it. We wouldn't embrace it. Today we have this idea that leadership is something to be looked for, and everyone wants to be a leader. The man wants to be the head of the household. Really, the women have it better than the men, because the woman is not necessarily going to be held accountable for her husband on Yawm al-Qiyamah, but the man is going to be held accountable for his wife. The woman is not necessarily going to be held accountable for her children on Yawm al-Qiyamah, but the man is going to be held accountable for his children. So now if you have a man who was man enough to get married, man enough to have kids, but he's not man enough to look after them on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and in this dunya, he's going to be held accountable for that on Yawm al-Qiyamah. And we have a very shallow understanding of halal and haram in our time today. We look at halal and haram simply from the perspective of a fiqh book, a literal kind of understanding. Is there an imam there to do the nikah? Yes. Are there 2 witnesses? Yes. Is the wali there? No. But these fuqaha here, they say that the wali can be exchanged, etc., when it doesn't suit the situation that I'm in. That's basically what they're saying. They're, as has been mentioned before, Shafi'i in fiqh, Hanafi in marriage. Why? Because it suits them. They get married, and they say it's halal. But really, when you look at it from an ethical perspective, when you look at it from the framework of Islam, from the prophetic perspective, would the Prophet ﷺ get married to a woman, have kids with a woman, and leave her in a non-Muslim country, go off to another country, get married, build a house, and have kids over there, and never see his kids in a non-Muslim country? Is that the actions of the Prophet ﷺ? Would the Prophet ﷺ get married to a woman, have kids with her, and then go off and get a secret wife somewhere else? Is that the action of the Prophet ﷺ? No. It's very clear. The Prophet ﷺ would not allow for this to take place. The Sahaba would not allow for this to take place. And some people, they'll say, yeah, but some of the Sahaba, they got married and divorced. They're married and divorced. Yes, but they did it publicly. And the village was in place. The village was in place to raise the children. Today, where's the village? Today, we don't have a village. And therefore, we have to pay extra attention to our homes, extra attention and care to our wives, to our children. And from a marriage counseling perspective, I can say, and perhaps I'm wrong, but this is my current opinion, a lot of problems in marriages boil down to men not being men. Simply men not being men. Arguing with their wives. It's not befitting for a man to argue with his wife. bickering with his wife. It's not befitting. As was mentioned earlier, that for a man to become a man, there's a certain level that a man has to raise himself to. Someone gave the analogy like a duck looks good above water, but beneath water the feet are all over the place. But everyone else shouldn't be seeing that. But nowadays you have men that are acting like children in their households. Men that are playing computer games all day long, don't want to work, and they're happy to be married like that. The wife is going out to work, happy to split things 50-50 with his wife. That's not from rujula, that's not from manliness in Islam. Being a man is not how big you are, how masculine you look, how tough you act. That's not what manliness is about. That's not what manhood is about. Manhood is about being responsible, taking care of your family, taking care of your community, putting others before you put yourself. The Prophet ﷺ put his community first, put his family first. If he ate, his family ate. If he acquired wealth, his community acquired wealth. If his community went to war, he went to war with them. That's what being a man is about, collective responsibility. Not following the nafs, following the desire. It's halal because the Imam said so and there are 2 witnesses, no one needs to know, I can do what I want to do, not taking responsibility. That's not from manhood. And the Prophet ﷺ said very clearly, it's enough of a sin that a person will be taken to hellfire that he doesn't take care of those whom he is responsible for. And today, if you look at so many problems we have in our communities, and I would suggest pornography is one of those problems, addictions of various kinds, drugs, alcohol, mental health issues, a lot of these issues stem from a lack of father figures within our communities. A lack of father figures within our communities. In fact, marriage breakdowns with the current generation, it is the result of this current generation not having a role model in the house. A man doesn't have a man who he can look to teach him how to be a husband with his wife, to teach him how to be a man in the household. And the women didn't have a father to look to teach them how to be a man with the wife, what she should expect from her husband when she gets married, to give her that emotional stability. This issue here, the lack of a father in the household, is a very big issue. It's a very big problem. And it's one of the key issues that we need to address, because if we address this issue, we address so many other issues. You can talk about so many things, promiscuity, adultery, the way that certain parts of our communities are acting, all comes down to a lack of father figure in the household. And when I say a father figure, I don't mean a man who's there but he's not actually there. I mean a man who's there and he's taking care of his responsibilities. He's taking care of his wife, he's taking care of his kids. He's involved emotionally, physically, financially, mentally, and it's not easy. The Prophet ﷺ, they said about his daughter Fatima radiallahu anha, that she was like him in the way that she walked, in the way that she spoke. What does that tell you about the relationship between the Prophet ﷺ and his daughter? There was a relationship there. When she would enter the room, he would get up and go to her. And when he entered the room, she would get up and go to him. She was the first person that he told when he was informed of his coming, passing from this world. He told Fatima radiallahu anha. And she cried and then she laughed. She cried because first he told her, I'm going to be passing away. And then she laughed because he told her, you are going to be the first to join me. And she passed away 6 months after the Prophet ﷺ. But that tells you about the close relationship that he had with his children. As was mentioned earlier, whenever he received food, he would send it to his wives. And in fact, after the death of Khadija radiallahu anha, he would still give food or gifts to the friends of Khadija in honor of her. So this issue, the first issue here, the responsibility of the man. الرجال قوامون على النساء. Men are, to a degree, the backbone of society. To a degree. And it could be argued women are the backbone from another perspective. But together they make the community what the community is. Um, the and then, I've put down here absent mothers because you do have the absent mother, but the absent mother does not look like the absent father. The absent father is either physically absent, he is actually not present, nor does he want to be present, or he's present but he's not actually present. He's like an ornament in the household. He comes and he goes. He has no interaction with his family. And sometimes he's not present because the woman won't allow him to be present. And that's another issue that needs to be addressed. Then you have the absent mother. Is it possible that you can have an absent mother? Yes, you can. You can have a mother in the household. She feeds her kids, she clothes her kids, but that's it. There's a difference between sustaining your kids and raising your kids. There's a difference between nurturing and giving life. You're feeding them, you're clothing them, but are you raising them? Are you nurturing them? And one of the issues of our time today, unfortunately, from what I have seen and read, afflicting the women more so than the men, which ties into the issue of pornography addiction, smartphone addiction. Smartphone addiction, where the mother is at home and she's on her phone all day. Whether she's talking to people, she's browsing, watching videos, plugged into something. That has an impact on the kids. It has a direct impact on the children. And these devices, you have to, there are two camps in this world. There is the camp of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there is the camp of shaitan. And you do not need, as the late Muhammad al-Ghazali said, he said, you do not need to be an agent of your enemy in order to aid your enemy. It's enough that you are dumb-witted. It's enough that you are foolish. And he actually said, it's enough that you are ahmaq, which basically means stupid. In order to aid your enemy, you don't actually have to be paid by your enemy. The fact that you're not aware of your enemy's plot and plans is enough. So now think about these devices. Who are these devices designed by? The apps, the companies. Who designs these companies? And what is it that they are trying to gain from you by giving you these devices? Are they trying to benefit you? No. If they are trying to benefit you, they're not trying to benefit your akhirah, they're trying to benefit your dunya. But from our philosophy, from the Islamic philosophy, you cannot take akhirah and dunya. You have to make a choice. Either akhirah or dunya. The more you fill your heart with the akhirah and love of akhirah and love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more you are going to be disconnected from the dunya. And the more you fill your heart with dunya and love of dunya and everything that comes in the dunya, the more disconnected your heart is going to be from Allah and the akhirah. And so even if these companies, etc., they want to benefit you in your dunya, they want to bring ease to you in your dunya, it doesn't serve your ultimate purpose, which is what? To worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't serve. And the Islamic apps that are present on these phones, they are windows. They are windows in a problematic system. The system around the window is still a problem. And if you read about the designers, so the Sheikh mentioned, for example, the colors and so on and so forth, think about the screens, AMOLED screens, and how colorful they are, how addictive they are. A moth is addicted to fire. These screens are similar to us. And when you look even from a psychological perspective, there is something called an OCD. What is an OCD? An obsessive compulsive disorder, where you become obsessed with something, which leads you into compulsive behavior. Think about your phone. Do you not obsess over things that are present on your phone? It might be WhatsApp, it might be Instagram, it might be TikTok, it might be some sort of buying and selling platform, whatever it is, YouTube, news, and what happens? That obsessive thought, I wonder what's happening in this part of the world, I wonder what's happening, did this person reply, did so on and so forth. The blue tick syndrome. Has my message been read? Why haven't they replied? What does it lead to? It leads to what? The compulsion. The compulsion to check your phone. How many times a day do you check your phone? How many times? But will these things be discussed in the mainstream? No. Why? Because it goes against the underlying idea behind the existence of all of these things, which is what? Capitalism. The commodification of desire, the commodification of interests. Why? Because the more you spend, the more they understand about you, the more that they can cater to your wants, your needs, your whims, your desires, the more money they can make. And that's better for the economy. But what's the cost? It's better for the economy, but what's the cost? The cost is the soul. The cost is the soul. The cost is the marriage. The cost is the kids. The cost is your mental well-being. So these devices, it's not only the pornography that's a problem. The device itself is a problem. The device itself is a problem. And I have said before, and I will say it again, if you do not have a need for a smartphone, if you do not have a need, i.e. you do not use a smartphone for business, you do not need a smartphone to stay in contact with your family, then you should try to move away from the smartphone. It's better for your life. It's better for your heart, better for your mind. And it's very difficult. Why is it very difficult? Why is it difficult to move away from the smartphone? It's a real question. Why is it difficult? Some right now might be thinking that's a bit extreme. Why? Why is that the case? Why is it difficult? Huh? Because it's an addiction. It's a collective addiction. When was the last time, think about it, and someone can give me an answer. When was the last time that you spent a few hours without checking your phone? There may be the odd person here or there, but most people, they're checking their phone constantly. And I suffer from this as well. I'm not saying I'm free from this. There's a key point here. A contemporary thinker of Islam, he said, if you want to cure society of its sicknesses and illnesses, you have to first rise above the sicknesses and illnesses of society. You have to clean yourself. But today we are sick people trying to cure other sick people. Who heals the healer? This is the conundrum of our society. We are all engrossed in these problematic behaviors. And we are role models for our families. When I say our families, our younger family members. Back to the point anyway, the absent mother. So the absent mother there is such a thing as an absent mother. She feeds the kids, she clothes the kids, she puts the kids to bed, but there's no emotional input. There's no intellectual input. There's no compassion. There's no rahmah, which is a point I'm going to come to, inshallah. The second point, tarbiyah, which is linked to the point that was just mentioned, tarbiyah. Anyone can sustain the life of a child. Anyone can do that. I.e. feed, clothe, put to bed. And I'm sorry to be so blunt and so unfiltered today, but animals do that. Animals feed their kids, and animals look after their kids from the physical perspective. But we're not animals. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has dignified us and honored us to be insan, to be man, and has given us a purpose. And the purpose here is what? To worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the general purpose. But there are specific purposes that we all need to think about. What's my specific purpose, and so on and so forth. What is my purpose as a parent? Why am I raising this child? What do I want to raise this child to be? What do I want my child to contribute towards society? What type of life do I want my child to have? These are questions that will determine the direction I take as I raise my child. For example, if you want your child to be a doctor, what are you going to do? You're going to seek out education for your child. If you want your child to be righteous, how are you going to build that righteousness in your child? The Prophet ﷺ, he said, كل مولود يولد على الفطرة فأبواه يهودانه أو ينصرانه أو يمجسانه. كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام, that every child is born upon the fitrah. And the fitrah being the natural disposition of man, where good is good, bad is bad. Today, man is man, woman is woman. But those things can be corrupted. Are there any examples of that corruption taking place? Anything that anyone can think of? Yeah, you said it, not me. Anything else? Does Allah give us an example in the Quran? What did Qawm Lut say to Lut alayhi salam? take them out of our village. They want what? Purity. The natural disposition that we have can be corrupted. And in fact, this is a philosophical discussion had by the ulama of Islam. Do you think that Islam and rational, sound thought go hand in hand? What do you think? Yes or no? But then what happens when you have a community of people that argue that this goes against rational thought? What's the problem? The problem is the corruption of thought, not Islam. And so our thinking processes can become corrupted. The way that we view the world can be corrupted. For example, today we live in a society which is very reductionist in the way that we look at things. Everything is a chemical. Everything is a reaction to something else that's chemical-based, materialistic. If I eat this, this will happen, etc., etc. We don't take into consideration spiritual, metaphysical, and so on and so forth. And that has an impact on a lot of things related to Islam. One being that we desire everything is explained to us. We desire the ability to rationalize everything, etc., etc. But going back to the point, you can have a person whose natural disposition is corrupted. And this is one of the dangers of where we're heading. Because there was a generation, and I say alhamdulillah that I have come from that generation, where things were very clear. Things were very clear amongst Muslims and non-Muslims. But now you have a younger generation who are born into a society which is telling them the opposite. You are born into a society which is telling them that a man can be born and they are actually a woman, and a woman can be born and they are actually a man. That's the norm to them. So what happens when this child grows up and they reach adult age and they have been trained to think in that manner? When someone comes along and says to them, no, a man is a man and a woman is a woman, that person will say, there's a problem with you. Why? Because that's become the norm to them. They haven't seen anything outside of that. That's their norm. That's very problematic. When you have the complete destruction of morality, where you have children being born into a society where promiscuity is the norm, they look at the person who's not being promiscuous and they say, you're strange. And you find that amongst children today. Is that not the case? Is it not strange amongst certain communities that a person is in their 20s or their 30s and they haven't had an intimate relationship before, outside of marriage? Is that not looked upon as strange? It is. There are terms that are used for men that don't engage in promiscuity and women that don't engage in promiscuity. There are terms for these things. Why? Because that's become the norm. And so the fitrah can be corrupted. Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, he says that the main component of corruption when it comes to the natural disposition of a child is who? Not society, the parents. The parents are the main element of corruption. And perhaps it can be argued that that statement was made in a context. We live in a context where the child is not with the parents for 8 hours and the man is working if he's there, the mother unfortunately working nowadays as well, etc., etc. So the society has as big a role to play as the parents. Perhaps it can be argued. You have the television, you have social media, etc. But the point is that a child is born and they know right from wrong, they know man from woman, they know righteous from evil, etc. These things are naturally inside of them. And in fact, a research was carried out and studies show that children have a tendency, they naturally believe in the existence of a higher being, a creator. That's their natural disposition. Because man has been created to believe in the idea of causation. If there is a table, there must have been someone who has designed and produced that table. If there is a universe, there has to be a creator for the universe. That's the natural thinking process of man. But going back to the topic, try not to go off track too much. The point is, the main aspect of parenting is tarbiyah. Tarbiyah. And this topic here, tarbiyah, what should we raise our children upon? So much to be said. But the main two that come to mind, number one, belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from a theoretical, theological perspective, but from a living perspective. Living with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Relying upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Knowing who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And number two, akhlaq. Akhlaq. And the Prophet ﷺ, when describing taqwa, he as if a person asked, how can I be a righteous person? He said, اتق الله حيث ما كنت. Fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Have consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wherever you are. وأتبع السيئة الحسنة تمحها. And follow up a bad deed with a good deed and it will wipe it out. وخالق الناس بخلق حسن. And have good character with the people. These are three key ingredients to being a righteous, upright person. And Ibn Rajab, rahimahullah, when commenting on this hadith, he says that many people do not take into consideration the fact that akhlaq is a key component of salah and taqwa. Akhlaq is a key component. The Prophet ﷺ, when did he start calling people to Islam? When did the Prophet ﷺ start calling people to Islam? It's a real question. Huh? 33? 40? You sure? Anyone else? So around 40? Anyone else? So when the Prophet ﷺ came down from the mountain and spoke to Khadija radiallahu anha and said, cover me, and described the experience that he had. And he said, أخاف على نفسي, أو كما قال, I fear for myself. What was her response? Why did she not question the Prophet ﷺ's mental state? Because he was known for what? His akhlaq. He was known for his akhlaq. When those that were close to him heard about revelation, they accepted him as a prophet. Why? Because of his akhlaq. And within a majority non-Muslim community, akhlaq is very, very important. More so than when we're living in a majority Muslim community. Because the way that we treat others is going to have an impact on the way others see Islam. And it's something to really take into consideration. How are we raising our children in our households? Raising them to have respect for their elders. Raising them to have respect for each other. Raising them to have respect for Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger alayhi salam, and so on and so forth. Belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and akhlaq. Everything else comes afterwards. If we can raise our children to have real belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will ask us, how do we pray? We don't need to show them how to pray. Why? Because they will want to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They will ask us, how do we give zakah? How do we perform wudu? They will go out and seek that which we didn't teach them. Instilling love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and a connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hearts of our children is crucial, especially in this time today. Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala, in his famous book, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, he speaks about his journey to certain knowledge. He speaks about his journey to certain knowledge, and he says that he basically tried all of these schools that were claiming to have certain knowledge in his lifetime. He said, I found that the way to certain knowledge is through the worship of the people of tasawwuf, the worship of those who are basically vigorous and diligent and attached to reaching Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said that's the only way to certain knowledge. He said, I realize that certain knowledge is a light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places in the heart. You can't find certain knowledge through texts. You can't find that certain knowledge, i.e. of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence, through fiqh, through books of aqeedah. Those things help. But the light of Iman is something that we have to try our hardest to place into our children's hearts. And we only have a small window with our children. We only have a small window. Once they start to hit the teenage years, that's where it becomes turbulent and that's where it becomes difficult. When they're pre-teens, they listen to their parents and they take from their parents. They see their parents as an authority, to the extent that if their teacher tells them something and their parents tells them contrary to the teacher, they'll put the parent first. But once they hit the teens and they want to start developing their own ideas and so on and so forth, that's where the job becomes difficult. The third point, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, كلكم راع ومسؤول عن رعيته والأمير راع والرجل راع في أهله ومسؤول عن رعيته والمرأة راعية في بيت زوجها ومسؤولة عن رعيتها. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, every single one of us, the term used earlier, is a shepherd. The Amir, the leader, is a shepherd for his community. The man is a shepherd over his household and responsible for his household. The wife is a shepherd and responsible for the members of her husband's household, etc. Something that we can take from this hadith is the importance of hierarchy. There has to be a hierarchy in the home. What does that look like? We live in a society now, we're a boiling pot of cultures. And previously, for example, if you came from a Pakistani household, a Somali household, a Bengali household, a particular type of Arab household, etc., you would have been raised and you see the gender roles playing out in front of you. You know who's boss in the house and so on and so forth. Now, with the diversification of our communities, the mixing of cultures, these roles are being lost and clashes are taking place. And so it's important to think about these things sometimes before getting married, and if we haven't already done so, then in marriage. Who do we show respect to in the household? Does the wife show respect to her husband? If she doesn't, the kids will not respect him. Does the man show respect to his wife? If he doesn't, the kids will not respect her. Are the man and woman on the same page? Are they a team when raising the kids? Because sometimes what happens is there is a clash and it has an impact on the kids. If you have two drivers and you're trying to drive, even if you're trying to drive in the same direction, it can cause a problem. There has to be a driver. And الرجال قوامون على النساء, yes, men are responsible for their households, but it's not a dictatorship. It's not a type of tyrancy. It doesn't mean the man has to dictate and point his finger, etc., etc. No, the Prophet ﷺ used to engage in mushawara with his wives. He would seek their advice, seek their counsel, and that's something which is healthy. But we have to think about gender roles within our household because these have an impact on our children, and they have an impact in parenting. And it's one of the issues that are not being discussed enough, the issue of gender roles. And we also have to try to separate ourselves from reactionary ideologies, whether it's feminism or whether it's the Red Pill movement. Feminism is a reaction to the extreme place that Europe was once in, and the Red Pill movement is a reaction to the extreme feminism that we now find prevalent in Western societies. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a framework, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us roles based upon our capacities and our qualities. Men have roles that suit their capacities and qualities. Women have roles that suit their capacities and qualities. A man cannot take on the roles of women. Women cannot take on the roles of men. Just as the sun cannot become the moon and the moon cannot become the sun. If you swap the moon and the sun, we would all die. Likewise, a household. If the man tries to be the woman and the woman tries to be the man, the household is going to suffer severely. And a part of Islam is to accept the roles and responsibilities given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a part of Islam. And for some people, unfortunately, it's a bitter pill to swallow. Unfortunately. And it's both men and women. There are men that don't want to accept that they have to provide for their women, provide for their children, act responsibly, cut out the leisure that they want to engage in, and so on and so forth. And there are women that do not like the idea of having someone that they are responsible to, that they have to care for, that they have to listen to, and so on and so forth. But if we want that which is best for our children, then we have to accept that which Allah has deemed best for us based upon our qualities and our capacities. The next point is a point which, again, an entire topic, mercy and compassion. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Man la yarham, la yurham." The one who has no mercy, the one who does not show mercy will not be shown mercy. The Prophet ﷺ, he used to kiss and cuddle his children, his wives. He would hold the hands of children that were not his. Within many of our communities, the culture is very tough and rigid and rugged. We don't kiss our children. We don't hug our children. We don't kiss or hug our wives, our husbands, etc. And that's not the way of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Sahaba, when Islam came to them, they would ask many questions to the Prophet ﷺ, and many of those questions were questions which were basically being used to refine the culture that they already had, even though it was a very simple culture. That which was in line with Islam remained. That which was not in line with Islam was shunned. And we need to take the same approach. Just because I come from a culture which is a bit tough, it doesn't mean that I have to show that same toughness with my children. And for men especially, if you don't show love to your daughters may end up seeking that love elsewhere. It's an unfortunate reality. If you do not show love to your daughters may end up seeking that love elsewhere. You have to think about these things. And sometimes there may be issues why we can't show love. Maybe we weren't shown love. But if we don't break the cycle, we just allow it to continue. We just allow it to continue. And we can be a generation that breaks many cycles. Because by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's grace, we have been given so many tools of education and so on and so forth. And so showing love and compassion and mercy to each other, husband, wife, children, it's very important. And when you show love and mercy and compassion to your spouse, you're also showing love and mercy and compassion to your children because they pick up on these things. But if you're harsh and you're rough and you're tough and you're rugged, then your children are going to be the same. And men, if you are not loving and kind and compassionate towards your daughters, they will find it difficult to be loving and compassionate towards their husbands when they get married. And so you are potentially making it difficult for them to sustain marriages in the future. Likewise, women, if you are not loving and compassionate and caring towards your sons, you make it difficult for them to show that love and compassion and mercy to their wives when they get married. The relationship between the father and daughter and mother and son, it has an impact for a long time in a person's life. And that's why it's important for those of us that have young children to start to act now, to think ahead, think generationally. Think about how we're contributing to society through our children, through the way that we raise them, and so on and so forth. And the final point, to conclude, inshallah, is to show, and I touched upon it before, but just more specifically, to show interest and involvement with our children. And there's a very famous hadith. The Prophet ﷺ, he was passing by a young boy, and this young boy, he had a pet bird, and his bird passed away. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he said to him, "Ya Aba Umayr, ma fa'ala an-nughayr?" Basically asked him, what happened to your bird? Showing interest in that which the boy was concerned with. The Prophet ﷺ, you're talking about the Prophet ﷺ, like, let's think about the context. This is the leader of an entire nation, the leader of the believers at that time and the believers that would follow him afterwards. He had the likes of Umar ibn Khattab, Abu Bakr, Umar and Uthman radiallahu anhum at his service. If the Prophet ﷺ wanted to, he could have whatever it is that he requested brought to him. He was the highest political leader at that time, but yet he was showing concern to the concerns of a young boy who was a member of his community. And that's the approach that we should have with our children, to show concern for that which they have concerns for. We shouldn't see ourselves as above their concerns. We shouldn't see their concerns as petty. Why? Because you're investing in them. You're developing their confidence. Umar, he used to take his son Ibn Umar with him to gatherings and to sit with the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, etc. And who did Ibn Umar become? One of the great scholars of Islam, one of the greatest of the companions. So investing in our children, bringing our children with us, making our children a part of us, and making ourselves a part of our children. And we shouldn't belittle, especially for those, unfortunately, for those that are involved in da'wah sometimes. It's very easy to belittle your family, i.e., you're concerned with the community, you're busy with the community, you're engaging with the community, but you're not engaging with your family. And that can be detrimental. It can happen to anyone. Who knows where the good is going to come from? And one of the issues of our time, I mentioned we are obsessed with leadership. We don't talk about followership. The Prophet ﷺ was successful because of the followership of the companions. Musa alayhi salam, from a I guess a material perspective, was unsuccessful because of the followers of Musa alayhi salam, Banu Israel. When he wanted to enter Palestine, you go and fight with your Lord. We're going to stay right here. When he left them for a few days, they had taken a calf to worship and so on and so forth. The Ansar, when the Prophet ﷺ asked them how they felt about fighting outside of Medina, what did they say? If you take us to the depths of the ocean, we're coming with you. Sami'na wa ata'na. The motto of Banu Israel, Sami'na wa asayna. Followership is crucial. And the point that I'm trying to make is that we think big today because of maybe it's an impact of social media. We think fast and we think big. I'm not happy with one or two individuals that I bring to Islam. I want hundreds. I'm not happy with benefiting one person. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, if Allah were to guide through you one person, it would be better for you basically than the dunya. The best that this dunya can offer you. But today we live in a time where we're not happy with a small change. We want something big, we want something grand. The Prophet ﷺ said, if a child memorizes the Quran, the parents are placed upon a mat of misk, if I'm not mistaken, and they are crowned with crowns with which in the crown jewels better than this dunya, more beautiful than this dunya. So imagine if that's your child. And here, our purpose here is to what? To acquire Jannah. To acquire Jannah. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you raise 3 daughters, they can be your ticket to Jannah. And one of the companions said, 2, Ya Rasulullah. He said 2. Do we focus on those small things? We think big, we think grand, we think quick. What about the household? Our parents in old age and so on and so forth. So investing in our children, spending time with our children, making sure that our children are central to our lives. It's very important. And I traveled last week. I went to Cardiff and I met a friend of mine there. And he's not going to hear this, so I can say, inshallah. He graduated from, it's not live, he graduated from Medina, alhamdulillah. And he's a hafiz of the Quran. And his Quran, he has itqan. When you listen to his recitation, he has itqan of the Quran, the pronunciation of the letters, the tajweed, etc. He spent a lot of time. For those that know about qira'ah, you can tell he spent a lot of time in his memorization and his perfection of the Quran. He teaches a hadith class once a week. He's involved in a hifz class for young people. He regularly washes those who have passed away. He's a person that from the outside you would say he's a righteous man. And I met his father, and his father, when I saw his father, he reminded me of what I've read about the father of Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah. I'm not suggesting that my friend is an Imam al-Ghazali, may Allah make him one, but his father reminded me of what I read about Imam al-Ghazali. When you read about Imam al-Ghazali, you will read that his father was not a learned person. He was not a student of knowledge, but he was a person who used to love the ulama and love the du'at. And he would frequent the circles of the ulama and the circles of the du'at. And he would ask Allah, he would make dua, oh Allah, bless me with a son who is an alim. Bless me with a son who is a wa'idh. And he was granted Al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, and his brother, who was a wa'id. He became very well known as a person who would remind people and call people back to Allah, and he would have a profound impact on the hearts. And his father reminded me, because the love that he showed in his speech, you can tell when someone loves something. It was coming across, the love that he had for the people of Quran, the people of knowledge, etc. And he said something to me which really affected me, because I had my daughters with me and they were running wild in the house. They're young, and so they were going up and down the stairs, etc., like in and out of the rooms. There were other children there. So I was trying to politely tell my daughter off. I didn't want to embarrass myself, so I was trying to tell my daughter, sit down and relax. You're in someone's house. And he said, this is the exact words, he said, leave them, you can't buy that in the shops. He said, that noise, that energy, he said, you cannot buy it. And this is coming from an elderly man. He said, when you get older, you will miss this. And so how many of us, we're busy working, thinking about the dunya, running non-stop, and we're missing out on something that when we get older, we're going to look back and say, I wish I spent more time with that, i.e. children, our children. It's a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we shouldn't see parenting as a task. We shouldn't see it as a job. We should see it as a blessing. See it as something that we look forward to. See it as an escape from the dunya. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given children a purity. Children have a purity. And that purity, it's untainted by the corruption of this dunya. And so when you're with your children, it's taking you to a purer place. And so you should enjoy it and say alhamdulillah for the blessing. And put your time and effort into your children. And in the future, bi'idhnillah, we will look at that generation and we will say alhamdulillah. And I conclude by reminding myself first and everyone else that the likes of Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, rahimahullah, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmed, they had mothers, they had fathers, perhaps not always in their lives for whatever reasons, perhaps orphans, etc. They had uncles, they had aunties, they had teachers. We read about these individuals. We read about the Prophet ﷺ. Did he not have individuals who are key to the way that he was raised? He did. Abu Talib played a very important part in his life, ﷺ. His grandfather played, even though for just a short time, a very important part in his life. And likewise, the ulama that were mentioned, the great people of Islam, we read about them, but really they are the fruits of the seeds planted by their mothers and their fathers and their communities. They grew and they became the fruits from which we benefit. And so we should look at our children from that perspective as well. It's an amana, it's a responsibility, but it's a great blessing and it's a great opportunity. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to raise our children in a way which is most pleasing to Him. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our children from the fitan of this dunya, that which is known to us and that which is unknown. I conclude with that, inshallah.